Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy Interview Guidance Program 2023. So in today's lecture we are going to discuss a very important topic, that is the electoral bonds scheme. So we all know that the government in the year 2017 has introduced the electoral bonds scheme. So this electoral bond scheme has been introduced to bring in more transparency in the electoral funding. So we all know that in India, the state funding of elections is a provision not implemented. Since there is no state funding of election or political parties, what happens is the political parties directly get funds from the individuals, the citizens of a country, and from the companies which are established in India. So therefore, in order to make this process of political parties getting electoral bonds more and more transparent, the central government has introduced the electoral bonds in the year 2017. So why electoral bond scheme is in news? It is because the electoral bond scheme was challenged in the Supreme Court because it has been promoting on the ground that it has been promoting anonymity. It has been promoting anonymity in the political funding to different political parties. So that could lead to the corporate political nexus, or otherwise called as unholy nexus, between the political parties and the corporates. And in fact, the central government would also be able to know who have contributed to which political party. So because of all these reasons, when this petition was filed in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, after a detailed hearing, has struck down this electoral bonds scheme because it has been allowing for the anonymous donations to political parties. So therefore, the Supreme Court finally declared the electoral bond scheme as unconstitutional or not valid. So therefore, in today's lecture, we are going to deal with different questions. Firstly, we will understand what are electoral bonds. So this is the first question that we are going to discuss. And after this, we will also understand when were these electoral bonds were introduced, for what purpose they were actually introduced by the government. Secondly, we will also understand what are the benefits of the electoral bonds. Okay, right, the center has introduced the electoral bonds, but what are the benefits? We need to understand the benefits as well. So right after discussing these benefits, so we will also briefly discuss about the criticism that the electoral bond scheme has faced. Okay, so why electoral bonds have attracted a large scale criticism, and then we will proceed on to discussing the petition which was filed against the electoral bond scheme. So you all have heard about the Association for Democratic Reforms. This particular organization has filed a petition in the Supreme Court against this electoral bonds scheme. So ultimately, we will also understand what Supreme Court has said about the electoral bond scheme. What was the opinion of the Supreme Court? So therefore, it will equip you with adequate knowledge about the electoral bond scheme and its evolution, and what is the Supreme Court opinion over the electoral bonds scheme. So firstly, the first question that we are going to discuss is what are electoral bonds? Right. So as I have already told you, in India, we do not have state funding of political parties. However, this is a long pending demand that various committees such as Dinesh Goswami Committee and Hora Committee have recommended that there should be either full state funding of elections or the partial state funding of the political parties. That should be allowed. So therefore, by allowing the state funding of political parties, we can ensure a level playing field. Firstly, there will be a level playing field among all the political parties, and apart from ensuring level playing field, there would be less chances of corruption. chances of corruption within the political parties. So because of this reason, both Dinesh Goswami committee as well as ORA committee have recommended that there should be either full state funding of the political parties or partial state funding of political parties should be allowed. So since the state funding of elections is not allowed in India, so the central government in the year 2017 have come up with a new scheme. So the scheme is called as the electoral bonds scheme. Okay, so through these electoral bonds, under this scheme, electoral bonds would be issued, and these electoral bonds can be used by the citizens to fund the political parties of their choice, right? So as I have already told you, this is electoral bond scheme, right? So the electoral bond scheme issues electoral bonds. Now one citizen can purchase these electoral bonds, and then he can submit this electoral bonds to a particular political party of his choice. Okay, so in India, this is how the political parties are actually funded through this electoral bonds scheme. So I hope you have understood the concept behind this. So however, there are certain limitations. So citizen cannot fund every political party which is established in India. Rather, there are certain guidelines for that. One is the political party which he intended to donate this particular electoral bond. So it must be registered under the section 29A of the Representation of People Act 1951. Okay, so we have the Representation of People Act 1951. So that deals with the electoral matters. So therefore the political party, first condition, the political party must be registered with the registered under the section 29A of the Representation of People Act 1951. This is the first condition. The second condition is it must get above 1% of the valid votes. Okay, so it must get above 1% of the valid votes, so that are polled in the state legislative assembly elections, okay, state legislative assembly elections or the general elections. Okay, so only then the party would be eligible to receive the electoral bonds from a citizen, right? So I hope you're clear about this with respect to the electoral bonds scheme. Now the question comes here, the question is how much a citizen can contribute to a particular political party. Okay, so the denomination of these bonds, what is the value of the denomination of these electoral bonds, right? So for example, this is an electoral bond, right? So this is an electoral bond. So the electoral bond value is 1000 rupees. Okay, so the citizen have no restrictions with respect to the purchase of these electoral bonds. So he can purchase any number of electoral bonds, the value multiples of 1000, the value multiples of 10,000, and the value multiples of 1 lakh and even 10 lakh. Okay, so even 10 lakh and even 1 crore as well. Okay, so he can purchase any number of electoral bonds with the value multiples of this. So there are no restrictions and absolutely no limitations on the citizen which he intended to purchase these electoral bonds for the purpose of donating them to the respective political parties. Okay, so here one condition that you have to understand, that these electoral bonds must be purchased from a bank. Okay, so these electoral bonds must be purchased from a bank. However, all the banks will not sell these electoral bonds. In this case, only State Bank of India, okay, so only State Bank of India is authorized to sell these electoral bonds to the citizens during the time period that is decided by the government. Okay, so there's a certain window every year, okay, certain window of at least 5 days or 6 days of window. So in this period itself, the State Bank of India will sell these electoral bonds to the citizens. So then the citizens can purchase these electoral bonds and they can donate these electoral bonds to whichever political party they want. Okay, I hope you are clear up to this. Okay, so the donor or the citizen can give this particular bond to the party of his choice. To whichever party he wanted to give this electoral bond, he is free to give. However, there's another limitation to this as well. So the limitation is, when this particular donor gives the electoral bond to one political party, then this particular political party, party A, okay, so this is a political party A, so and the citizen has given electoral bond to political party A, so this particular political party must encash this bond, this electoral bond that is given by the citizen within 15 days. Okay, so he must encash the electoral bond within 15 days after receiving them, and they can then fund their electoral expenses with this money which is donated by the donor. Okay, so this is also another conditions. And other thing, I have already told you that these electoral bonds can be sold and bought only a specific window periods. So that will be announced every year. Okay, so only not available throughout the year, but only a certain periods of time, certain windows, only during those windows the electoral bonds are available for the public. Okay, so I hope all of you are clear about the electoral bonds. What are those electoral bonds? So this is how electoral bonds are being issued. So the next very important question that we're going to deal with is, so when these electoral bonds were issued and why they are issued. So in the beginning of the lecture, I have already informed you that in the year 2017, these electoral bonds were issued by the government. The scheme of electoral bonds was announced by the government in the year 2017. So however, we need to deal with the question that why the government has introduced the electoral bonds. So the first and foremost purpose is bringing in more and more transparency in the political funding. Okay, so to bring in more transparency in the political funding. Now, you cannot use black money. You cannot use black money for the purpose of political funding. Why? Because you have to purchase the electoral bond from the bank. So there will be no scope of using black money to purchase an electoral bond and fund the political party. And here the other condition is that you must purchase this electoral bond in either cash. You will not be allowed to purchase this in cash, either check or in digital form. Either check on digital form. You have to pay the necessary amount to the bank. However, you cannot use the cash to purchase the electoral bond. So this will not be allowed. So in this way, it will ensure more and more transparency in the electoral funding in India. The second most important aspect with the electoral bond scheme, so that was introduced in India, it is anonymity. So why anonymity? Because imagine a citizen who is a donor to one political party B. Okay, so here there will be anonymity with respect to the donor. So how much he donated for the political party B, and when he donated to the political party, who is this donor? So details will not be known. So thereby it will prevent the political victimization. Of the donor by the ruling party. For example, imagine this particular political party is not a ruling party, rather it is an opposition party. So therefore, there are chances that if there is no anonymity, that the government may know about this particular donor, and then it starts political victimization of a donor. Okay, so therefore the electoral bond scheme also maintains the anonymity of the donor. The third most important point because of which the electoral funding or electoral bond scheme was introduced is easy funding. Okay, easy funding pattern. So the electoral bonds usually allow the common people to even to purchase these electoral bonds and fund the political parties of their choice. So it essentially means that common people with ease, they can purchase these electoral bonds and they can fund the respective political parties of their choice. So because of these reasons, the electoral fund scheme was introduced. Okay, so the electoral bond scheme was introduced. However, you have to understand one important fact here. So the fact is, we have the Income Tax Act. So this Income Tax Act has provided for the reduction in the amount of money that a political party could accept in cash from anonymous sources from earlier 20,000 to 2,000. So what does this essentially mean? It essentially means that, so we all know that the in the year 2017, this electoral bond scheme was launched. This electoral bond scheme was launched. So the very same electoral bond scheme has made, that under IT Act. So if you wanted to donate to any political party in terms of cash, so you cannot donate more than 2,000 rupees. Okay, so you cannot donate any political party more than 2,000 rupees only in cash. Okay, so if you have cash and you wanted to directly give this cash to a political party, you can give only up to 2,000 rupees under the IT Act. Okay, so what was the earlier limit? The earlier limit was 20,000. So you can give up to 20,000 to a particular political party, but now you can give only 2,000 rupees to a political party in cash. Okay, so now we will understand how an electoral bond scheme would work usually. Okay, so so earlier also we have discussed that the notified banks, in this case State Bank of India, in this case State Bank of India is a notified bank and that issues electoral bonds. Okay, so that issues electoral bonds that we have already discussed, right? So this is the notified bank and this notified bank will issue electoral bonds. And secondly, so second is also same. So the notified bank issues electoral bonds a certain window period every year, certain window period, not throughout the year, but a certain window period every year. Third step would be the donor. So here we have a donor and this donor buys an electoral bond from the State Bank of India. Okay, so however, one limitation here is that he cannot use cash. He's not allowed to use cash for the purchase of this electoral bond. Rather, this particular donor must use either check or digital payment for the purchase of electoral bond, and then he has to deposit the electoral bond with the respective political party. Okay, so then this donor who purchased this electoral bond either through check or digital payment gives this particular electoral bond to the political party of his or her choice within a specified time frame, right? So the last step would be, okay, the political party received the electoral bond from a donor. Now this political party has the electoral bond, right? So this party will deposit the electoral bond in a party account. So there's a party account and the political party would deposit this electoral bond in the party account. Okay, so the details of which will be sent to the Electoral Commission or Election Commission, and this is how the electoral bond scheme usually works, right? So Now we will try to briefly understand the benefits of electoral bonds as well. So what are the benefits of electoral bonds? Because of this reason, electoral bonds were introduced. So earlier we have discussed, so electoral bonds were introduced because of transparency. So it brings in more and more transparency. And apart from transparency, electoral bonds, it makes political funding. It makes political funding easy, okay, because common man can also fund these political parties. And third, the reasons of anonymity. So because of these reasons, the electoral bonds scheme was introduced by the government in the years 2017. Okay, so as I have already told you that it will bring in more transparency in the political donations. Okay, so now in the earlier system, what happened? There was no electoral bond scheme, right? So you have to give money. At least each donor can give around 20,000 rupees of cash to the respective political party of his choice. And this is where the black money has been entering. The black money has been routing into the accounts of these political parties. The black money was used to fund the political parties in the earlier scheme of political funding. Okay, so therefore, in order to bring in more transparency, more anonymity, so this electoral bonds scheme was launched by the government. Okay, so now in this context, how much funding has been coming into the various political parties, and what is the nature of funding that these political parties receives, and also the source of funding, where it will be spent, will be known clearly. Okay, so everything will be known clearly, right? So apart from that, there will be non-disclosure on the part of the banks as well. Okay, so therefore, for example, he's a donor and he's purchasing electoral bond from the bank, and this particular bank, that is State Bank of India, will not disclose the details of the donor to anyone. Okay, non-disclosure of the recipients will ensure people are free to donate to any political party of their choice. Since there is anonymity, so this particular individual, this particular donor can contribute to any political party of his or her choice. Okay, so this is another advantage, another benefit of the electoral bonds. So after that, the other major benefit is it will reinforce the idea of moving away from the cash system. Okay, so earlier through cash, a donor can contribute to one political party. But now there's no chance of cash. Rather, you must contribute for the political funding either through check or through digital payments. Okay, so we are moving away from the cash-based system towards a clean money, which check system could not be able to achieve. So after that, there's also a 15-day window period. So within 15 days, the electoral bond must be encashed by the respective political parties. Okay, so 15 days between buying and selling will ensure they don't turn into parallel economy. So these are the major advantages or major benefits of the political parties. Now, the most important part of this electoral bonds, because of this reason, the Supreme Court has declared them unconstitutional. So why electoral bond scheme has been criticized? So why they are under criticism? What is the reason because of which they have been facing a lot of criticism? So first and foremost, we need to talk about the anonymity on the part of these electoral bonds. So critics of electoral bonds, so they arguing that yes, okay, anonymity was a basic element of this electoral bonds scheme. So there's no doubt about that. However, the State Bank of India, so this is a public sector bank. Okay, so this bank is owned by the government. So therefore, the government would know the details of the donors. The government would know the details of the donors, and the government would also know to which political party they have been contributing. to which political party they have been contributing. Because the State Bank of India is a public sector bank, and since it is a public sector bank, it is under the control of the government. So hence it clearly knows that which donor has contributed to which political party, how much money he has contributed to that particular political party. So government will know everything. But anonymity, earlier also we have discussed that anonymity is the basic element of these electoral bond scheme, but anonymity is only for the opposition political parties, opposition parties, and for the public. But anonymity is not for the government. Why? Because of this reason. Okay, so electoral bonds are only issued in the State Bank of India. This is a public sector bank. It is under the government control. So therefore the government can clearly see how much a donor contributed to any other political party. So next major criticism of this electoral bonds scheme is that since the SBI able to know the details of the donor. Okay, so SBI is able to know the details of the donor, and indirectly the government will also be able to know the details of the donor. So therefore the identity of the donor would be revealed to the government. So therefore it is compromising on the principles of privacy. So in fact, in Puttaswamy judgment, Supreme Court has recognized Article 21. So right to privacy is part of Article 21. So therefore the electoral bond scheme has also been violating the privacy of an individual. And after that, we should also talk about the political victimization of the candidates, political victimization of donors. So how this political victimization of donors usually done. Now please understand that a donor purchases the electoral bond from the State Bank of India, and then he uses the electoral bond to fund the opposition party. Now the government will know the details of the donor through State Bank of India. So, and he funded the opposition party, then the government would victimize the particular donor since he has funded the opposition party. Okay, so therefore the government of the day will either extort money from the big companies or victimize the donors who have contributed, who have funded the opposition parties. So therefore some parties who have contributed for the ruling party, they get the unfair advantage. So while investing or setting up new units, new manufacturing units, the government policies. So why? Because according to data, more than 75% of the all electoral bonds, so far have gone to the ruling parties. Okay, so far have gone to the ruling parties. So since the ruling parties or party which is in power at the day will be able to know about the donors of these electoral bonds or donors of political funding, there is a chance that the unholy nexus would develop between the corporate houses as well as the political parties. So that is not good for the democracy. And not just for the democracy, but specifically for the free and fair elections. Because when the big corporate companies have been funding the political parties, especially the ruling party, then those companies can indirectly control the government. So therefore that is not good for the democracy in general and specific to free and fair elections to different political parties. And this is the criticism that is leveled against the electoral bonds scheme. So I hope you're clear about this criticism. So apart from that, we also have a few more points with respect to the criticism. Okay. So we will also understand those things. Okay, so sorry, it is not responding. Okay, so I'll briefly discuss them as well. Okay, so apart from this, there's also other criticism, other ways of criticism on this electoral bonds scheme. Okay, so apart from anonymity, privacy, and unfair advantage, so that is with the electoral bond scheme, and it develops a kind of a nexus. So all these things are a criticism on the part of the electoral bonds scheme. So because of this reason, Association for Democratic Reforms, okay, so Association for Democratic Reforms, so this is an organization which essentially protects democracy or strengthens the democracy, strengthens or protects democracy by suggesting various reforms, and also bringing in informed citizenry, so therefore the Association of Democratic Reforms have filed a petition in the Supreme Court. That what it says, it says that the electoral bond scheme that was introduced by the central government is unconstitutional in nature. Why? Because it is arbitrary and illegal in nature, because it has been promoting an element of anonymity, and it was also benefiting the ruling party which is in power. So therefore it has sought the Supreme Court that the electoral bond scheme must be declared as unconstitutional, because it has been promoting anonymity, and it also allows a window for the government to victimize the donors who have not contributing to the ruling party or who have been contributing to the opposition parties. So therefore they have filed a petition in the Supreme Court. So what they have sought? They sought that this electoral bond scheme is illegal, and they also asked the Supreme Court of India, that earlier there were elections to Assam plus West Bengal, so they demanded that the electoral bonds would not be sold through the State Bank of India. Still the case will be decided. So this is what the Association of Democratic Reforms has sought from the Supreme Court with respect to the electoral bonds. So recently Supreme Court has delivered its judgment with respect to the electoral bond scheme that we have already discussed. Okay, so what Supreme Court has said, this electoral bond scheme is unconstitutional. So this is unconstitutional, and therefore apart from this, the Supreme Court has also asked the State Bank of India. The Supreme Court has also asked the State Bank of India to submit all the details with respect to the electoral bonds which are purchased to the Election Commission of India by March 2024. So this is what the Supreme Court has said. And the Supreme Court has also talked about or linked the electoral bonds with the fundamental rights. It also linked the electoral bonds with the fundamental rights. How? The Supreme Court said that this electoral bonds scheme is violation of citizens' right to information. Okay, so it is violative of citizens' right to information. So in which article the citizens' right to information is mentioned? Under Article 19, clause 1, clause A. So under this has been mentioned. Okay, so under this particular article, citizens' right to information has been mentioned, and the Supreme Court has said that this electoral bond scheme is violating Article 19, clause 1 and subclause clause A and subclause 1. Okay, so this is violative of right to information of the citizens. So ultimately the Supreme Court has struck down this electoral bond scheme as unconstitutional. So however, this decision of the Supreme Court has been welcomed by various sections of various experts because of multiple reasons, because we have already talked about the negative aspects of this electoral bond scheme. So this should not favor the ruling party, the political party which is in power at that time. So it should provide a level playing field. Okay, so if it is anonymous, if it has been maintaining anonymity, then it should maintain the anonymity for the government as well, along with the public and also along with the opposition parties. So therefore it is expected that the government would come up with a more transparent and better electoral funding scheme, so that would ensure a level playing field, and that would also lay the strong and solid foundations for the free and fair elections in the country. And this is what is expected through the electoral bonds scheme. Okay, so that ultimately strengthens the democracy in India. Okay, so this is all about the electoral bond scheme. And what is this electoral bond scheme, when it was introduced, and what is the purpose of introducing this, and what are the benefits and the criticism and recent Supreme Court judgment with respect to the electoral bonds scheme. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.